This is Venice, Italy, one of the most visited cities on Earth. Around 15 million people come here every year to walk its narrow alleys and glide through its shimmering canals. But few ask the real question. What kind of people would be desperate or crazy enough to leave solid ground and build a city on water? And even more strangely, why? Beneath the marble and sunlight lies something almost unbelievable. Venice stands on more than 10 million wooden piles, driven by hand into the mud over 1,000 years ago. These hidden pillars, preserved in the oxygen-poor lagoon, turned hard as stone and still hold the city upright today. Behind the beauty is a story of fear, ambition, and impossible engineering. A city born from chaos that somehow became one of the most powerful empires in Europe. It began in the 5th century, an age of collapse. Wave after wave of invading tribes swept through the crumbling Western Roman Empire. The Goths sacked Rome itself in 410. Cities that had stood for centuries, Padua, Verona, Aquileia, fell in flames. Northern Italy became a battlefield. Armies moved like storms, burning, looting, and vanishing again. For the people left behind, there was nowhere safe. And so they did something unthinkable. They ran toward the sea. Families fled east, carrying what little they could: relics, icons, and memories of the world they'd lost, where the land dissolved into water, the Venetian Lagoon. Look at it on a map. They crossed the marshes and reached the edge of the Adriatic, a maze of mud flats and tidal channels, cut off from the mainland by miles of shifting sandbars. It doesn't look like salvation, but to them it was. No horse could gallop, no army could march. The tides were their fortress, the mud their shield. Tradition says the first settlement began in 421 AD, founded at the stroke of noon on March 25th. Whether legend or truth, it marks the moment when fear became ingenuity. When survivors decided to stay, they built platforms out of timber, resting on thousands of wooden stakes driven deep into the lagoon's sand. Each pole touched the next, forming a dense grid, the beginning of that hidden forest that still holds Venice today. It was supposed to be temporary, balanced on water and willpower, a way to survive until the world calmed down. But the world never did. As one empire fell, another was quietly taking shape, balanced on water and willpower. What they built had no precedent, no solid ground, no stone to quarry, no safe foundation at all. Yet somehow they found a way. Beneath the shallow waters of the lagoon, the first Venetians began an experiment that should never have worked. They drove long wooden piles, cut from alder, oak, and elm, deep into the clay until they struck denser layers of soil. Each pole was about 2 to 4 meters long, and together they created an underground forest. Over the centuries, more than 10 million piles would be hammered into the lagoon floor, packed so tightly that the city above still rests on their tips. On top of the piles, they laid heavy wooden beams crosswise, forming a kind of floating raft. Then came the pale blocks of Istrian limestone, quarried along the Croatian coast and carried by ship across the Adriatic. Unlike ordinary stone, Istrian rock resists salt and time. It became the armor of Venice. Brick by brick, the city rose from the lagoon. Houses, towers, bridges, churches, each layer resting on the one below, balancing like architecture built on air. You might think the wood would rot. It didn't set. Trapped beneath the water and sealed from oxygen, the timber never decayed. Instead, minerals from the lagoon seeped into the fibers, slowly turning the wood as hard as stone. The same mud that once threatened to swallow the city ended up preserving it. Every palace, every bell tower, every cobbled square you see today still stands on that invisible forest. By the year 1000, the scattered wooden huts of refugees had become a dense network of islands tied together by bridges and canals. A city that could be crossed entirely on foot without ever touching open sea. From above, it looked impossible. A marble labyrinth rising out of the water, glittering in sunlight, its reflections blending with the waves. But beneath that beauty was pure engineering genius, a design born of necessity that would one day support an empire. Venice lacked farmland, iron, and marble quarries. It was nothing that most cities required to grow. Yet somehow, the lagoon itself provided everything. The first gift was the sea, both barrier and highway. From their wooden platforms, Venetians could trade freely while staying safe from the endless wars on the mainland. No invader could reach them without a fleet, and few dared to try. The tides that once trapped them now carried them wherever they wanted to go. The second gift was wood. The forests of northern Italy and the Alps provided the raw materials for ships, piles, and trade goods. Timber became both a foundation and a form of currency. Venetian merchants shipped it across the Adriatic, trading it for stone, grain, and cloth. What started as survival soon evolved into commerce. And the third and most valuable gift was salt. In an era before refrigeration, salt was worth its weight in silver. It preserved food, supported armies, and and built fortunes. The Venetian lagoon was abundant with it. The sun and tides performed the work. Seawater trapped in shallow basins left behind sparkling white crystals. Venice managed the process carefully. State-operated saltworks, controlled prices, and protected trade routes. Entire cities relied on Venetian salt, and the Republic could set its price. Timber built the ships, salt filled their holds, and the sea carried them to every market in the Mediterranean. By mastering these three elements, salt, wood, and water, Venice transformed isolation into an advantage. What started as a desperate refuge was becoming a hub for trade, a city built not for war or conquest, but for connection. And those connections would soon extend far beyond the lagoon, across the Adriatic, through the Aegean, and into the heart of the Eastern world. The lagoon had given Venice safety. Trade had given it purpose. Now that trade would give it power. By the 11th century, Venice was no longer a collection of fishermen and exiles. It was a rising commercial force. Its ships sailed beyond the Adriatic, through the Aegean, and all the way to Constantinople, the richest city in the world. Venetian merchants carried salt, timber, and glass in one direction, and returned with silk, spices, and gold. Every voyage was a risk. Every voyage could make a fortune. In time, their fleets filled the Mediterranean. Over 3,000 merchant ships and 300 war galleys, the largest naval force in Europe. At the heart of this machine stood the Arsenal of Venice, the world's first industrial shipyard, spanning more than 40 hectares. It could launch a fully armed galley every single day. Its workers followed assembly line principles centuries before the Industrial Revolution. In an era when most ships took months or years to build, Venice could produce one in 24 hours. Speed was power. From the arsenal came the galleys that ruled the Mediterranean, elegant, fast, and deadly. They escorted merchant convoys, hunted pirates, and enforced Venice's trade monopolies from the Black Sea to Egypt. But commerce was more than protection and profit. It was influence. The Republic negotiated with emperors and sultans, with popes and kings. Its ambassadors operated in every major court in Europe, and its spies in every port. Venetian gold funded crusades, financed wars, and shaped politics far beyond the lagoon. And at the center of this web was a single coin, the Venetian ducat, minted in pure gold. For centuries, it was the most trusted currency in Europe. Stable, uniform, and recognized from London to Cairo, the ducat became a symbol of Venetian reliability and ambition. By mastering trade instead of territory, Venice created an empire without borders, an empire of routes, ships, and influence. From their floating city, they controlled the flow of goods, information, and power across half the known world. The water that once protected them now carried their dominion, wave by wave, port by port. Wealth made Venice powerful, but power demanded control. By the 13th century, the Republic called itself a democracy, but it was anything but that. The city was ruled by a tight circle of noble families. They elected the Doge, Venice's leader, and filled the great council that governed the state. To outsiders, it seemed like stability. Inside, it was surveillance. After a failed coup in 1310, the nobles created a new institution, the Council of Ten. It was meant to protect the Republic from treason. Instead, it became the most feared power in Venice. The Ten met behind locked doors inside the Doge's palace. They operated in total secrecy, issuing orders that could make anyone disappear overnight. To enforce their will, they created a network of informants, a medieval intelligence service that reached into every corner of the city. On the marble walls of Venice, they installed the lions' mouths, carved stone boxes in the shape of a lion's face, where citizens could drop written accusations against their neighbors. The council promised anonymity and justice. What it delivered was fear. If the Council of Ten decided you were guilty, there was no appeal. You'd cross the narrow bridge of sighs, hearing the echoes of your own footsteps for the last time before descending into the dark, damp prison beneath the palace. The lower cells flooded during high tide. Prisoners slept in chains with water rising around them. Those condemned to death were led between two marble columns in Piazza San Marco, a space Venetians still avoid walking between today. Torture devices like the strapado waited in the shadows. Simple, brutal, and effective. Venice was beautiful on the surface, but beneath the gold and marble, it was a city built on secrecy and fear. The same discipline that built its empire also policed its soul. And as the centuries passed, that control would be tested by forces far greater than any council could contain. For centuries, Venice had seemed untouchable. Its fleets ruled the Mediterranean. Its gold financed wars and built cathedrals. Its spies whispered in every royal court. But power built on trade can vanish as quickly as the winds that fill a sail. In 1453, a single event changed everything. The city of Constantinople, Venice's greatest trading trading partner, fell to the Ottoman Turks. Overnight, the old trade routes to Asia were cut or taxed. The riches that had flowed through Venetian hands now passed through Ottoman ports. At first, the Republic adapted. Venetian merchants struck deals with the new rulers, trading in Istanbul, Alexandria, and Damascus. For a time, they still prospered. But across the horizon, a new threat was rising, not from the east, but from the west. Portugal and Spain had begun to sail around Africa, finding their own sea route to India. Soon the world's wealth would no longer move through the Mediterranean, but across the open ocean. Venice fought to stop it. In one of history's strangest alliances, the Republic joined forces with Muslim powers to block the Portuguese from entering the Indian Ocean. In 1509, their fleets clashed off the coast of India, the Battle of Diu. Venice lost. The Atlantic world was born, and the age of Mediterranean empires began to fade. The Republic tried to reinvent itself. Banking, glassmaking, diplomacy, but the tides of history had turned. Trade that once made Venice rich now passed it by. Its isolation, once its greatest protection, became a prison. By the 1600s, Venice was a shadow of its former self. Still beautiful, still proud, but slowly sinking, both literally and politically. The world was moving outward, across oceans, toward continents Venice could not reach, and no wall of water could keep the future from arriving. Empires fall, but cities somehow endure. Venice had lost its trade routes, its armies, its power, yet it remained. In 1797, Napoleon ended 1,000 years of independence. The city passed from France to Austria, and finally to a united Italy. Its empire was gone, but its beauty made it immortal. By the 20th century, Venice had become something new, a museum of itself, a monument floating on borrowed time. But the sea that once protected it began to turn against it. On November 4th, 1966, an extreme combination of tides and wind unleashed the worst flood in Venice's recorded history. More than 80% of the city went underwater. Priceless artworks and archives were destroyed. Thousands were left stranded, and 5,000 people lost their homes. The world watched as Venice drowned. And then slowly the city came back, repaired, restored, and determined to survive. But the waters kept rising. In 2019, another flood struck, the second highest in modern times. St. Mark's Basilica was submerged. 85% of the city was flooded again. Scientists warned that by the end of this century, sea levels around Venice could rise by nearly a meter, enough to overwhelm the defenses built centuries ago. So Italy turned to engineering once more. In 2020, the long-delayed project known as MOSE, short for Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico, was finally activated. A system of 78 mobile barriers was installed at the inlets where the Adriatic meets the Lagoon. When tides exceed 110 centimeters, the barriers rise, sealing the city off from the sea. On its first real test, MOSE worked. The water stayed below the stones of St. Mark's Square for the first time in decades. But the fight isn't yet over. Salt water still seeps into the lower walls of Venice's buildings. As it evaporates, salt crystals grow inside the bricks, expanding, fracturing, and slowly eating away at the very foundations that have stood for 1,000 years. It's a cruel irony. The same salt that made Venice rich now threatens to destroy it. Yet the city endures, as it always has, between the forces of land and sea, creation and decay. Venice may no longer rule the world, but it continues to defy it. Venice has always lived with the sea, never against it. Every day the tides rise and fall, and with them, the city itself seems to breathe. Beneath the marble and the crowds, beneath the sound of footsteps and gondolas, lies a rhythm older than empire. The slow pulse of water, wood, and stone, the same heartbeat that's carried Venice through 15 centuries. It's easy to think of Venice as fragile, a relic from another time, but look closer. This city is alive, a living organism built on adaptation. When the world collapsed, Venice found safety in the sea. When wood should have rotted, it turned to stone. When empires fell, Venice traded instead of conquered. When the tides rose, it learned to rise with them. Few places on earth embody resilience like this. Every ripple on its canals is a reminder that survival is not resistance, it's harmony. And maybe that sips what Venice really teaches us. That endurance isn't about standing still, but about learning to move with the changing tide. The city that shouldn't yet exist still does. It breathes, it endures, and it waits for the next sunrise over the water. Every civilization faces the same choice: resist change or adapt to it. Venice has always chosen adaptation. It was born from fear, but built on ingenuity. It thrived not by conquering others, but by mastering the elements: salt, wood, and sea. For over 1,000 years, it has stood between two forces: the pull of gravity and the rise of water. And somehow, it has kept its balance. Maybe that sep's why Venice feels so human. We we too build our lives on unstable ground, faith, memory, time. We too learn to float. The city doesn't set promise eternity. It reminds us that endurance is an act of creation, that survival can be beautiful. One day, the tides may rise higher, the stones may crumble, but for now, Venice remains breathing, shimmering, impossible. A mirror of what humanity can be when it learns to live with the water instead of against it. And as long as the bells of St. Mark's still echo across the lagoon, the city that shouldn't exist still will.